I have to wonder what St. Thomas Aquinas would have been like as a student in the classroom. It's interesting to ponder. We actually just had the feast day of one of his teachers not long ago, St. Albert. And I remember when I was studying the works of St. Thomas, and especially his discussion of the nature of truth, that he was very passionately dedicated to what was true. I think in a way that's almost off-putting for most of us in modern society. That I remember us discussing the fact with our teacher that if we were to take a multiple choice quiz in school and find ourselves confronted with a question where we had no idea whatsoever what the answer was, that if we were to guess on that question, Thomas would have argued that that was a venial sin. That Thomas was so passionate about the truth that he would have said, it's one thing if you think you're fairly confident you know the answer and you get it wrong. He said that's a different thing. But to completely guess is to lie, because it's to tell your teacher that you think you know what you're talking about when you fully well know that you have no idea, that you are completely BSing them and hoping you can pull off that 1 in 4 chance of just getting it right by accident. And as I was reflecting on that, it got me thinking again just how easy it is for us in itty-bitty, teeny-weeny little ways to allow lies to creep into our lives. That it's so easy to justify the little ones, the ones that are barely even white lies. But it's amazing how those kind of lies can just breed like rabbits. That we develop a certain comfort level with coming up for explanations for friends and family when we don't need to at all. Hey, you want to hang out tomorrow? No, I have an appointment with my television. Hey, do you want to grab lunch today? No, I already brought my lunch. It just happens to still be at Panera, where they haven't made it yet. It's like sometimes we're just allowed to say no. like we don't have to justify ourselves. That we can, in fact, just be faithful to the truth and still do it in such a way that we're not intentionally hurting somebody else's feelings. Like we don't have to come up with these elaborate, convoluted, almost white lies to try to justify why we can't do something. Even when I analyze my own life, I find that temptation is so ever present. But it's important for us to be mindful of the fact that the little sins tend to build, that they still desensitize us over time to the bigger ones. And so initially when we had that conversation in my philosophy class about Thomas's reaction to the equivalent of multiple choice questions, we found that kind of laughable. Like over time I've developed a certain amount of respect for that. That we have to draw the line in the sand somewhere, and I think it's better to be too honest than not honest enough. I mean, I don't think you can be, okay, maybe you can be too honest. That's a homily for another day. And as we're presented with our gospel reading today, it helped me to reflect on how doing that, how being committed to the truth, even in little stuff, is not an ancillary thing in our faith. It's actually one of the ways very concretely that we respect and worship Jesus Christ, who is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Because what is it that happens in our gospel? So Jesus finds himself in the judgment seat before Pontius Pilate, and Pontius Pilate asks him if he is the King of the Jews. And the answer to that question ought to be easy. Yes, I am a king. I am, in fact, the King of Kings. So I certainly qualify as a king. But that's not what Jesus says, though he had every right to. Jesus' response is an interesting one. He says, "You say I am a king, but for this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. That Jesus' kingship, at least as he presents it to Pilate, is in the realm of truth. That's what Jesus came to do, is to help us so that we would not be led astray anymore, but that we would live according to what's real and what's right. Because as you study philosophy, philosophers have this remarkable knack, and Thomas Aquinas is no exception. They have this remarkable knack for taking really simple and really obvious things and making them super complicated. That they take words that we think we understand perfectly well and then write an entire book about them that just leaves us like confused now about what that word actually means anymore. But sometimes we need that because we start to take a thing for granted when in fact we don't understand it at all. And the simpler a thing is, the more disastrous it is when we don't actually understand it. And truth is one of those places where I think that's really valuable. Because as Thomas and many others point out, one reasonable definition of knowledge, I think, which is related to truth, is when the thing up here aligns with the thing out here. That I possess knowledge when I actually have correct facts about something in my head. That if I were to claim that I knew what an apple was like and firmly believed that it tasted like and had the consistency of macaroni and cheese, I'm probably wrong, or I have been having some really weird apples or some really weird macaroni and cheese. One or the other, or maybe both. That I do not possess knowledge, which is to say I don't have the truth about apples or macaroni and cheese. That what's up here does not relate to what's out there accurately. That knowledge is when my mind aligns with reality, which is to say that there's something outside of me that precedes me, that does not rely on me, that in fact I rely on if I'm going to know the truth. That we would say truth then is something entirely independent of who I am and whether or not I even exist. That there is a thing out here, and I possess truth when I come accurately to know that thing. And even that wording isn't quite right. And I think this is maybe the first time that I've even noticed this, reading this gospel passage, which is one of the fascinating things about the Bible. You can read it 50 times and still pick up something new every time you read it. That at the very end, when Jesus is describing his kingship, he says this: everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. That he doesn't say everyone who has the truth listens to my voice. He says everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. We don't ever talk like that. That we speak, especially in our culture nowadays, about us having the truth. You know, I have my truth, you have your truth, somebody else might have their truth, and those things don't necessarily have a lot to do with each other. That's not the way that Jesus sees the world. And since he's the one who made it, I probably ought to try to see the world the way he sees it. That Jesus actually makes me the possession of the truth. That the truth is something that owns me. That either I accept the truth or I don't. I bend the knee to the truth, and in a sense I reverence it and venerate it, or I don't. Those are my choices. One of the possible options is not that I get to change it or choose it. That's been the sin of the human race from the very beginning, that Adam and Eve ate the fruit being told by the serpent that they would have knowledge of good and evil, which is to say that they could figure out what good and evil is on their own without God and without reality. But that's not what truth is. Truth is something outside of me which I either respect or I don't. It's not something that I choose within myself and manifest into reality. That's another thing that we hear people throw around from time to time nowadays too, is trying to manifest something, that if I just will a thing hard enough, if I just think about a thing enough, it'll happen. And while there's a certain psychological basis for that, and we can argue certain elements of truth that might underlie that principle, the basic presumption that truth is dependent on me is a false one, that I depend on reality. And that's why it's beautiful, and this helps us to understand better our relationship with Jesus, when we realize that Jesus told us not merely that he is the one who chose truth, not merely that he is the God who speaks truth, but that Jesus actually is truth. Like, he's truth with a capital T. That Jesus tells us in the Gospels, I am the way and the truth and the life. And so when I respect lowercase t truth, when I'm honest when somebody wants to hang out and I don't, when I'm honest with my answers on the multiple choice quiz, when I'm honest with the little things, those are actually ways in which I'm worshiping Jesus as my king, because Jesus' kingship is truth with a capital T. That if truth is something outside of me that I respect or I don't, and Jesus is truth, then I'm training myself to not merely respect facts. I'm training myself to respect him. That I'm learning as I grow up as a human being to live in such a way that he's the one who calls the shots, or to live in such a way that I think I'm the one who does. That either I make up truth, which is the way that we view the world and our culture to some extent, that either I have my truth or he has me. That those are the only two options, and they're mutually exclusive. Either I am Jesus's, or I try to make him in my image. And we see the same thing with love, that Jesus is love with a capital L. That my heart is made fundamentally to choose love the way God expects me to love. That either I recognize that every person made in the image and likeness of God has dignity and is lovable, or I have my own love, just like I have my own truth, which at the end of the day is nothing more than bigotry and hatred. That's what my love is. Because when I get to pick and choose what is lovable and what is not, rather than admitting that something objectively is outside of me, when the source of love is me rather than you, now I get to decide whether or not you're worth my time. I get to decide which people get to be appreciated and respected and possess dignity and which people don't. That I get to choose whether or not you have dignity in Christ Jesus or you don't. But that's not the way that the King of Love works. That either I bend my knee to him or I don't. Either I love the way Jesus has called me to love or I don't. There is no valid option in which I get to decide what love looks like, in which I get to decide what things are worth loving and what things aren't. Which is different from opinion and allegiance to sports teams and things like that, where there can be legitimate debate, unless you're an Ohio State fan, and then I just pity you, I'm sorry. There's no debate there. But there are things that just are objectively good. And if I don't love them, that's a problem. Like, that's something that's broken in my heart that needs to be fixed. That's not something I get to change or decide on my own. That as we worship Jesus as the King of the entire universe this weekend, we worship him the way that he desires to be worshiped. First, here at Mass, but second, in response to the answer he gave to Pilate. That for this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth, and everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. And so in all of the little places where I respect the truth when it's easy not to, and when I love when it is so easy not to, I'm not just merely doing things, I'm worshiping Jesus. and I'm training myself in being a better disciple and servant of his. May we, by God's grace today, not worry so much about our truth or our love, but desire to belong to the truth with a capital T and desire to belong to love with a capital L.